She said I was just a chapter in her life, and everyone around her laughed. But I didn't argue. I just closed her book and started writing my own. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and tell me in the comments if you've ever been told you were just a chapter. Because this story, it's about what happens when the next page turns without them. It was a Sunday evening, the kind that feels too quiet for bad news. The sun was setting through the living room window, painting everything gold, but her voice made it all feel gray. We'd been sitting on the couch, takeout boxes on the table, some old movie playing in the background, the kind of scene that used to mean comfort. Not that night. She looked at me, serious but calm, like she'd been rehearsing it in her head for days. "Ethan," she said, "you're a great guy. Really. But I think you were just a chapter in my life. A chapter. Like everything we built, the road trips, the late night talks, the plans we made, was just a paragraph she could skip when she got bored." I remember blinking at her, trying to process the words. "A chapter?" I asked quietly. "Yeah," she said, her tone soft, almost sympathetic. "You were important. You helped me grow. But I'm ready for the next part of my story." I wanted to laugh, but I couldn't find the humor. Instead, I just sat there, nodding slowly, while something inside me went completely still. She got up, smoothed her dress, and started gathering her things. I watched her move around the room, taking little pieces of what used to be us. A framed photo here, her favorite mug there. Every sound, the rustle of her bag, the click of her heels, felt like punctuation marks on something I hadn't finished reading yet. When she walked out the door, she didn't even look back. The door closed, and the silence that followed was deafening. I sat there for a long time, staring at the empty space she left behind. There wasn't anger, not yet, just disbelief, and the slow realization that she really thought she'd just move on and I'd fade like an old page in her story. The first few days after she left were rough. I went through the motions, work, gym, repeat, but everything felt like background noise. Friends called, invited me out, tried to help me get over it. But what they didn't understand was that it wasn't heartbreak I was dealing with. It was humiliation. The idea that someone could look at everything I gave and still see it as temporary. One night, about 2 weeks later, I got a message from her best friend, Rachel. We'd known each other for years, mostly through her. Rachel was always kind to me, though she joked once that I was too good for my own good. Her message was short. "Hey, I'm moving this weekend. Any chance you could help? I could really use an extra pair of hands." I stared at it for a while, unsure if it was a good idea. But sitting alone with my thoughts wasn't helping either. So I said yes. Saturday morning came early. I pulled up to her place, and there she was, hair pulled back, boxes everywhere, a look of mild panic on her face. "You actually came," she said with a half smile. "Most people bail when they hear the word moving." "Well," I said, lifting a box from her porch, "guess I didn't get that memo." We spent hours hauling boxes, packing up her kitchen, taking breaks on the floor surrounded by half-empty pizza boxes and old memories. Somewhere between laughter and exhaustion, she said something that caught me off guard. "You know," she began, her tone softening. "She told me you were just a chapter." I froze mid-sip of my drink. "She told you that too?" I asked. Rachel nodded slowly. "Yeah, but she doesn't realize chapters are what make a story worth reading." That night, when we finished, she thanked me with a hug that lasted just a second too long. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't planned. It was just real. The kind of human moment you don't realize you've been missing until it happens. When I drove home, I kept thinking about her words. Chapters are what make a story worth reading. Maybe she was right. Maybe I wasn't just a chapter. Maybe I was the turning point. I didn't know it yet, but that weekend would change everything. Not because of revenge or closure or even love, but because sometimes the best endings come from the people who were never supposed to be part of your story at all. That next week after helping Rachel move, I found myself thinking about her more than I expected. Not in the way you think. There was no plan, no hidden motive. It was just easy with her. Comfortable. She was one of those people who made silence feel like a conversation. I'd stop by her new place to help unpack or bring dinner, telling myself I was just being polite. But I think we both knew there was something else underneath that. Something unspoken, quiet, patient. She'd joke that I was too organized, that I labeled boxes like a professional mover. I'd tell her she was too messy to live alone. Little things, harmless things. But those small moments started filling the empty spaces that used to belong to someone else. One evening, we sat on her living room floor surrounded by boxes and half-finished coffee cups. The room smelled like paint and takeout, and there was an old playlist humming softly in the background. "So," she said, breaking the silence, "how are you, really?" I wanted to lie, to give her the usual, "I'm fine," but something about her eyes made me tell the truth. "Honestly, I'm still trying to figure out what it means to be someone's chapter." She looked at me for a long time before answering. "Maybe it means you were part of someone's growth. Doesn't mean you stopped growing too." She said it so casually, like it was obvious, but it hit me harder than I wanted to admit. We talked for hours. About mistakes, regrets, dreams that felt too far away, and all the things we both lost along the way. When I left that night, she hugged me again. That same quiet kind of hug that didn't ask for anything but gave everything. On the drive home, the air felt lighter, like the weight of being a chapter was finally starting to fade. Days turned into weeks, and what started as occasional visits became regular evenings. We cooked together, went for walks, laughed about things that didn't matter. Somewhere in all of it, I started smiling without realizing I was doing it. I wasn't chasing closure anymore. I was living. But life has a strange sense of timing, doesn't it? Just when you start to forget the past, it finds a way to remind you it still exists. It happened one Friday night. Rachel and I were out for dinner, celebrating her promotion at work. We picked a small restaurant downtown, nothing fancy, just cozy and quiet. We were halfway through our meal when I heard a voice behind me, one that froze me mid-sentence. "Ethan." I turned, and there she was, Madison. My ex. The woman who once said I was just a chapter in her story. She looked the same, maybe a little more polished, like she was still trying to convince the world she had it all together. She smiled, that same confident smile she used to wear like armor. "Wow," she said, "you look different." I smiled back politely. "So do you." She glanced at Rachel and raised an eyebrow. "I didn't know you two knew each other," she said, her tone light but edged with curiosity. Rachel stayed calm, her expression unreadable. "We've been friends a while," she said simply. Madison's eyes flicked between us, trying to piece together what she was seeing. I could almost feel the tension rising in the air. "That's nice," she said finally, her smile tight. "Guess everyone moves on in their own way." Then she turned to me and added, "You seem happier." "I am," I said without hesitation. That stopped her for a second. She wasn't used to me being sure of anything without her approval. She forced another smile, muttered something about running late, and walked off. The silence that followed was thick, but Rachel just laughed softly. "Well," she said, "that was awkward." I laughed too, shaking my head. "Yeah, but somehow it felt like closure." And it did. Not the kind that comes with shouting or revenge, but the kind that just quietly settles in and tells you you're finally done. A few days later, Rachel texted me saying Madison had called her. Apparently, she wanted to talk. I told Rachel she didn't have to get involved, but she shrugged it off. "She'll be fine," she said. "She just doesn't like realizing she's not the main character anymore." I didn't know what Madison said to her, but when Rachel came over that evening, she just smiled and said, "You really got under her skin." I asked what she meant. She said, "You've changed. That you're colder. More confident." I told her, "You're not colder. You're just not waiting for her to tell you who you are anymore." I didn't know what to say. For a long time, I believed Madison's version of me, the safe, small, predictable guy she could outgrow. But Rachel saw something different. She saw who I was becoming, not who I used to be. And maybe that's what love is supposed to feel like. Not someone finishing your story for you, but someone handing you the pen and saying, "Keep writing." That night, as I was leaving, Rachel stopped me at the door. "You know," she said softly, "she was wrong. You weren't a chapter. You were the plot twist." I laughed, shaking my head. "That's a good line," I said. "Maybe I'll use it someday." She smiled. "Just make sure you give me credit." Driving home, I realized something important. Madison's words no longer hurt. They didn't define me. If anything, they pushed me toward a version of myself I might never have found otherwise. Sometimes people break you just enough for someone else to see the cracks and decide to fill them with something real. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I wasn't thinking about chapters or endings anymore. I was thinking about beginnings. And though I didn't know it yet, that next beginning was already waiting for me, quietly, patiently, and exactly where I left off. The days that followed had a strange calm to them, like life was finally catching its breath. Rachel and I had fallen into an easy rhythm. We weren't trying to define anything or rush it. It just worked. She'd drop by my place after work, sometimes with takeout, sometimes just to talk. There was no pressure, no expectations, just the quiet understanding between two people who had both seen what disappointment looked like and had no interest in pretending anymore. I started noticing little things about her, the way she laughed with her whole face, the way she chewed on her lip when she was thinking, the way she'd play music too loud when she was cleaning. She was chaos and peace wrapped into one, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't thinking about the past. I was living in the moment, fully and completely. One Saturday afternoon, she invited me to help her set up for a small housewarming party. Nothing big, just a few close friends. I showed up early, carrying a couple of bottles of wine, and found her in the kitchen surrounded by snacks and decorations. "You're early," she said, teasing. "You said 4. I replied, checking my watch. "It's 4:05. She rolled her eyes and laughed. "Fine, overachiever. Make yourself useful and open that bottle." We spent the next hour setting up, laughing, teasing each other, and for a moment, it almost felt like we'd been doing this forever. When people started arriving, the house filled with warmth and music. There were about a dozen guests, some coworkers, some old friends, all of them friendly. Rachel was the kind of person who made everyone feel welcome, and it showed. I stayed close to her most of the night, not out of possessiveness, but because she felt like home. But then, just as I was pouring another drink, I heard a familiar voice behind me. That voice again. "Wow," Madison said. "Didn't expect to see you here." I turned slowly. She stood in the doorway, dressed too perfectly for a casual gathering, her hair styled like she was about to walk into a photo shoot. My chest tightened for a moment, not from longing, but from the sudden clash of past and present. Rachel froze when she saw her. "You two know each other," Madison said with that same knowing smirk she used to wear when she felt in control. "Of course you do." Rachel's expression shifted into something polite but firm. "I invited him," she said evenly. "Is that a problem?" Madison shrugged. "Not for me. I just didn't realize we were recycling boyfriends now." The room went quiet. Conversations faded. The music felt too loud, and for a few seconds, all I could hear was the thud of my own heartbeat. I didn't move, didn't speak. Rachel stared at her best friend, ex-best friend, really, with an expression I couldn't read. "Madison," she said quietly, "I think you should go." Madison laughed, that high, empty laugh she used when she didn't know what else to do. "Wow, guess you've really upgraded, huh? From heartbreak counselor to replacement girlfriend." I finally stood up. "Enough," I said, my voice calm but cold. Madison turned to me, eyes wide, like she hadn't expected me to speak at all. "You don't get to come into her house and insult her because you made a mistake. You said I was just a chapter, remember? Well, I guess you forgot that sometimes the next chapter doesn't need you in it." The silence that followed was sharp. She stared at me, blinking fast, like the words had cut deeper than she'd admit. Rachel stepped closer, her hand brushing mine, steady and sure. "You should leave," she said again, softer this time, but with enough strength that even Madison couldn't ignore it. Madison hesitated for a moment, then turned on her heel and walked out. The sound of the door closing felt like an ending, the real one. The room stayed quiet for a while, the guests unsure of what to do. Then Rachel exhaled and said, "Well, that was awkward. Who wants dessert?" The tension broke instantly. Laughter returned, conversations resumed, and just like that, the moment passed. But for me, it didn't. It lingered. Because standing there next to Rachel, watching her handle the storm with grace, I realized something. Madison's words no longer had power. They were just echoes of someone else's insecurity. Later that night, after everyone left, Rachel and I sat on the porch with the last 2 glasses of wine. The night air was cool, and the street was quiet except for the distant hum of traffic. "I'm sorry about that," she said softly. "She had no right to show up like that." I shook my head. "Don't apologize. She showed me exactly what I needed to see." Rachel tilted her head. "And what's that?" I smiled faintly. "That I was never the problem. I was just in the wrong story." She smiled back, and for a while, neither of us said anything. The silence wasn't awkward this time. It was full. The kind of silence that means everything's finally right where it should be. When she finally leaned her head against my shoulder, it felt natural. No performance, no hesitation. Just two people who'd both been through their share of broken chapters, finally realizing they were part of something new. As the night stretched on, I thought about how life works in strange ways. Sometimes, the people who hurt you the most are the ones who unknowingly lead you to the people who heal you. I didn't need revenge, or apologies, or dramatic closure. I just needed peace. And sitting there with Rachel, I had it. What I didn't know, though, was that fate wasn't done writing. Because in stories like these, the best pages always turn when you least expect them to. The morning after the party, I woke up to the sound of rain tapping softly against the windows. The city was quiet, washed in gray, and for the first time in a long time, I felt completely at ease. I made coffee, sat by the window, and thought about everything that had led to that moment. The heartbreak, the silence, the strange, accidental friendship that had turned into something deeper. I wasn't the same man I had been months ago, the one who had begged for explanations or looked for closure in someone else's eyes. I'd learned that closure doesn't come from others. It comes from deciding the story doesn't control you anymore. Around noon, Rachel called. Her voice was soft but steady. "Hey," she said. "You free today?" I smiled. "For you? Always." She laughed lightly. "Good. Come by. I need help with something." When I arrived at her place, she was standing by the door with 2 cups of coffee, looking like she hadn't slept much. "I've been thinking about last night," she said. "About her." I sighed. "You don't have to. She's not worth it." Rachel nodded, but there was a seriousness in her eyes. "I know. It's not about her. It's about what happens next." We sat on the couch, and she looked at me with this expression that was equal parts fear and certainty. "Ethan, I don't want to make this complicated, but I care about you. More than I thought I would." Her honesty caught me off guard. For a moment, I just stared at her, searching for words that could hold what I was feeling. "Rachel," I said quietly, "you don't have to explain. You've been there when I needed someone, not because you had to, but because you wanted to. That's more than I ever got from anyone before." She smiled, almost shyly. "Good, because I think we both deserve something real this time." I reached over, took her hand, and for a few seconds, the world outside disappeared. It wasn't a grand, cinematic moment. It was simple, quiet, human, and somehow that made it perfect. Weeks passed, and life fell into a new rhythm. Rachel and I grew closer, not in the dramatic, sweeping way movies show it, but in the real way that happens when two people build something honest. We cooked together, planned trips we might never take, stayed up too late talking about everything and nothing. The past felt like a distant echo. Even when I thought about Madison, it wasn't with anger anymore, just gratitude. She had walked away thinking I was a chapter, and maybe she was right. But she never realized that chapters don't end the story. They just lead to the parts worth remembering. Then one afternoon, fate decided to test that piece again. Rachel and I were at a small bookstore downtown. She was flipping through novels while I browsed the business section when a familiar voice behind me said, "Ethan." I turned, and there she was again, Madison. She looked surprised, almost uncertain. Her polished confidence was still there, but softer now, like life had taught her a few lessons too. "It's been a while," she said. I nodded. "Yeah, it has." Her eyes flicked past me and landed on Rachel, who was walking toward us, a book in hand. Madison's expression shifted instantly. Shock, then realization, then something she couldn't quite hide. "You too," she began, but the words trailed off. Rachel smiled politely. "Hey, Madison," she said, her tone calm but distant. "It's been a long time." Madison nodded slowly, forcing a smile. "Yeah, I didn't expect, well, this." I could feel the tension thickening, but I didn't let it linger. "Life's funny that way," I said. "You think you know how it's going to go, and then it surprises you." She looked at me, her eyes searching for something, regret, anger, maybe nostalgia. "So," she said finally, "I guess I really was just a chapter, huh?" There was a faint tremor in her voice, like she already knew the answer. I met her gaze and said, "Every chapter ends, but not everyone gets to see how the story finishes." For a moment, the world seemed to hold still. Rachel stood beside me, calm and steady, the kind of presence that made everything else fade. Madison blinked, a flicker of something crossing her face. Regret, sadness, realization, maybe all at once. "You look happy," she said quietly. "I am," I replied simply. She nodded once, her eyes glistening as she whispered, Good. I guess that's how it's supposed to be. Then she smiled, a real one this time, small and tired, and turned to leave. Watching her walk away didn't hurt. It didn't stir anything at all. It just felt like turning the last page of a book I'd already finished. Rachel slipped her hand into mine. You okay? She asked. I smiled. Yeah, I think that was the last loose end. She leaned her head on my shoulder as we walked out into the sunlight, the rain from earlier gone, replaced by the bright shimmer of a new afternoon. Everything felt lighter, like the air itself had forgiven me for holding on too long. That night, we sat on her balcony watching the city lights flicker. Do you ever think about how people come and go in our lives? She asked. All the time, I said. I used to think it meant something was wrong with me. Now I think it just means their part of the story is done. She nodded. Exactly. And sometimes, the best chapters are the ones we never planned. I looked at her, really looked at her, and realized that everything that had once broken me had somehow led me here, to this moment, this peace, this quiet kind of love that didn't need to be loud to feel real. As the night settled around us, I thought about what Madison had said months ago, and for the first time, it made sense. Maybe I was just a chapter in her life, but in mine, she was the lesson that led to something greater. I didn't need revenge or validation. I had the ending she never expected. And as I held Rachel close, I whispered to myself, every story has chapters, but the best ones, the ones worth rereading, are written by the people who stay. If this story hit you somewhere deep, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share your thoughts in the comments. Tell me, has someone ever walked out of your story, only for you to realize they were just setting up your next chapter?